Alrighty. It's pretty late on my end. But I want to first start off by hoping everyone had a happy New Year's and a Merry Christmas. And I hope people got what they wanted for Christmas. So I wanted to start off with 2025. Start off by the subject. I just saw something, and it seems like this subject came from quite a few YouTubers. So I want to talk about it, and I also want to talk about moving forward with this kind of subjects that I'm going to talk about on my channel that I'm going to continue to talk about. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and finish continuing my audio engineering video series. I got to make about six to 10 more videos on that, and I think with those videos, I think people will be very happy with that content. That will give you the pretty much the general bulk of everything you would need to know to do audio engineering. It's real basic, but I want to also start music production class videos, and my approach to music production and how I come up with my song arrangements and things like that, as well as keyboard teaching videos. So that's my plan for this year. Now, I don't think I'm going to really do any studio tours updates because there's nothing new other than people seen all the gear that I've got. I don't plan on buying anything else gear wise. If I do, I'll let you know, but especially for rack gear, whatever, because I have pretty much every piece of rack gear that I could possibly want. You might see maybe one or two pieces here and there that might be new, but not really. I'm pretty much done with buying gear. What else? So to make it really, really short, I saw a video. A couple of people were making videos about Pro Tools, and some people were, one video YouTuber made a video about how Pro Tools was overrated, and there's a lot of people starting to say Pro Tools is just not the industry standard. I'm going to say this myself. I've never been a Pro Tools user. Just never had a need to be a Pro Tools user. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Pro Tools. That people that are Pro Tools users, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of people that learned on Pro Tools, and to me, it's always been another option for a DAW that people may want to use. I just never agree with it being an industry standard. Now, people know for me, what people know for me is I've always been a Cakewalk user. And some people may or may not understand why do I like Cakewalk. It's because I know the features of Cakewalk. That's pretty much it. I like the features of Cakewalk. I like how Cakewalk works. I like how it flows. I know Cakewalk, so I'm a user of Cakewalk. But there are people that are FL Studio users. There are people that are Ableton Live users. There are people that are Logic Pro users. There are people that are Cubase users. There are people that are Pro Tools users. There are people that are Harrison Mixbus users. There are people that like Mixcraft. And the list just goes on. So I think it's all my take on DAWs is very simple. If you work in this DAW and it does what you need to do, you're good to go. Period. I don't tell people to jump on another DAW simply because someone else is using another DAW. So that's how I look at it. Because it's like this. If you take, I don't care what it is, Reason, Studio, whatever, is that DAW able to use tools so that you are making audio or MIDI sound recordings with it? Can you edit in it? Can you multi-track with it? Can you use plugins with it if you want to? Does it do audio? And with the editing, can you cut, slice? Can you do all this stuff? Other than that, you're good to go. I think recording studios, the ones that are staying open, have come to realization, yes, we need to buy multiple DAWs. So whenever someone brings session files, if you have a client that was doing all their stuff in Logic on their Mac, and you have a Mac, and they can upload their session files right into Logic Pro. That's kind of like a common sense thing that you would think recording studios, and I'm talking about I'm talking about the really expensive multi-million-dollar recording studios. You spend multi-millions of dollars to build this top-end recording studio, but you can't spend a couple of $1,000s on some DAWs and maybe some, if I had a $25 million, multiple control room, live room, with each control room and live room had, let's say I was running the big analog console and outboard gear setups in all my control rooms, but I also have Macs and PCs with multiple DAWs. That kind of money, I would probably have the minimum amount of popular plugins, as well as, probably at least 10, 12. I would definitely have Studio One. I would have Ableton Live. I would have Cubase. I would have Reaper. I would have FL Studio. I would have Pro Tools. I would have Cakewalk. I would have Logic Pro. I would have all those DAWs like I do now, right? And then on top of that, I would have the Waves plugins, Slate plugins. I would have iKey Multimedia plugins, UAD plugins. I would have Isotope, Sound Toys, Plugin Alliance. I would have a whole slew of plugins, and I would at least have try to have the most popular bundles. That way, if someone was working, let's say someone was working on Logic Pro and they were using Plugin Alliance plugins, but they just couldn't get their recordings or mixes right doing it at home, and they want to come to a little bit more advanced studio, I would say, yeah, we can load up your log. Just give me your list, and what plugins are you using? Yeah, I have those plugins. I have Logic Pro. Just bring your stuff. It usually will load up. It's going to load up. If you have the same plugins, it's going to load the plugins that you have saved in your session file. Then I can actually mute or undo those plugins or whatever I need to do to make the changes that I need. And then let's say, for example, they were working, their home recording studio may only have consisted of let's say the Logic Pro, those Plugin Alliance plugins, they have their, maybe it's just a 2-channel Apollo Twin or something like that, or they had and then they just had just their keyboard, the mouse and maybe MIDI controller, the basics. But in my studio, I got this large format SSL console. I got some outboard gear. I got way more expensive gear. We can come back and they can come back. Let's say they want to, I'm running higher end preamps for vocals, better microphones, and all this. So they like, okay, we can come in, upload the files, bring in an artist, record it in my recording studio, then we can mix it and all that, run it through my console, and then use some of my outboard gear on top of the plugins or whatever, just to get a more polished, more commercial, professional sound that they may be looking for. That's what I think commercial studios should have been doing, instead of these ones that started to close because they just didn't want to adapt. Now, some recording studios may have closed, and I get it. A lot of recording studios were forced to close because it was just not financially feasible to stay open, because it was just too expensive to stay open, and they just weren't getting clients. The record labels weren't paying. There's not recording artists aren't getting this big advances, or whatever the factors are that cause recording studios like United or the Record Plant and all these big Capitol studios and all these big mega studios to start closing. They just, you're talking thousands, multi-thousands of dollars to stay running every month, and they don't have the clients to maintain that. So that's understandable, because most people have decided to do this at home. They like, I can buy some gear, I can buy plugin software, and whether someone is experienced or not, there's going to be always the argument of experience, knowledge, or whatever the case. The thing is, because there's no gatekeepers, there are a lot of people that are uploading music that it isn't being quality controlled anyway. The traditional, where you would do, or, a recording or whatever. The recording would be, where you're going to record, then you're going to mix it, then you're going to master it. I mean, the traditional way. On top of that, there are always going to be arguments that, there are going to be a lot of people that just don't like that of doing a home recording studio. They don't think it's going to compete. And I always say it's really based on the experience level of the recording studio, because there are people that can open up a commercial studio and don't know what they're doing. So it's really dependent. But in reality, a lot of people that are fighting some of the home recording studio are still recording the old school traditional way. And in their mind, they don't think some home recording studios are going to work, because people aren't recording like rock and roll, as an example. People are recording rock. Not everyone's recording rock and roll, as an example, or whatever. So they feel that because people aren't doing that, the music isn't good, or because they're doing it at home, and because people are doing more, like, I'm going to throw some examples, like some of the Indian popular music overseas, Afro rhythm beat type of music, or Korean, they call it K-pop or J-pop for Japanese popular music, or K-pop music, which I like a lot of K-pop music. They don't think that style of music, even though this music is fairly, it's only a few. Some of the music is only a couple years old. It's not really old at all. It's not like it's 80s or 70s music. It's fairly current music, and they're having these, like with K-pop as an example. There's a lot of Korean artists. They're groups. You know, they're 3-man, 4-man, 5-man, even something as much as 8 people doing these dance music to this K-pop music. But you got a lot of people that don't think that's good music because it's not recorded with, you know, it's not recorded mimicking like Led Zeppelin or something like that. It's not a 70s sound. You know, the Abbey Road Beatles sound or whatever. It's not recorded, you know, with the guitars and bass guitars and drums or whatever. They don't think that's good music. And that is all that really is just personal preference and opinion. That's all it really is. For me, my only thoughts when it comes to recording studios, even if whether it's done at home, is I personally like it sounding better going through like my Allen and Heath console here and using my outboard gear the most. Even though I have a really nice AD-to-DA converter, my Antelope Orion, and I record, even though I may use virtual instruments, I may use a virtual bass guitar or some virtual drums or whatever, but I'm outputting through the DAW, which is coming through the interface, and it's coming through the console to give it that analog console sound. So when I sequence some drums using one of the drum kits, and these are actual acoustic drum kits, real drum kits, you know, then I bring the sound out, you know, route the outputs, bring it through the console, and then plug in out. It sounds like it sounds. I prefer to do it that way. But not everyone needs to do that. If some people can perfectly work and get amazing sound just doing, you know, they can work in Studio One or work in or Reaper or whatever DAW of their choice and do all their drums and instrument sounds that they're going to use and vocal sounds and all. I'm just saying, I've always said this: if you're going to work just solely in your DAW and you're just solely going to use just plugins, the only thing that I highly recommend is make sure you set up auxiliary channels and bus channels, and use your inserts for inserting plugins on channels, and then using reverbs and delays on auxiliaries, and then setting up bus channels and setting all that up in your DAW so it works like an actual analog console to get the same sound. Because the reason why I'm saying that is because DAW mixing consoles, especially the ones that have the capability to do that, are modeled to emulate an actual analog console. Even though it's like, I would tell anyone, why do you think your mixing console looks like a mixing console? And even if you're working in Pro Tools or working in Reaper or whatever the case, most DAWs, the mixer looks, when you go to the mixer, the mixing console window in your Mac or PC of your DAW, and you look in that DAW and you open up the mixing window, why do you think they look like mixing consoles? They look like virtual computerized versions of a mixing console. They always have the channel. A lot of them have the LED meters or maybe VU meters or whatever the case. They have LEDs. They have, you know, you can actually solo mute the channel. All these functions that you would see on a real console. So if that's the case, most DAWs, the only thing they don't do is give you buses and auxiliaries, because most of the time the reason why they don't give you auxiliaries and buses channels, because they figure they don't know how many auxiliaries or bus channels you need. So they figure if you only need one auxiliary channel, well, then you go create your one auxiliary channel that you need. That's why most of those DAWs don't have it. Most DAWs give you the option to create an auxiliary channel. It's the same thing with bus channels. But when you start setting that stuff up, okay, I'm gonna need at least 6 auxiliary channels. If I create 24 tracks of instrument sounds and vocals and everything, I don't have any auxiliaries. If you create, let's say I need 6 auxiliaries because I'm gonna have 6 different effects going. What's gonna happen is when you set that up, the routing of how the signal is gonna react in the DAW coming through your converter is going to react the same way as if I engage or turn on auxiliary. The difference here is all I gotta do is turn the auxiliary knob, 1, 2, whatever, 6, whatever, 8, and it automatically routes to the auxiliary section. Well, it's gonna do that in your DAW too, which is gonna sound, because a lot of times when you're listening to your DAW, you're listening to the 2-track output master. So if you go to, when you set up all your channels, and then when you go to the mixer and you look at the master track, that master track, and you see the meters moving on the master track, that's the output sound coming out of the output of the interface. So that's what you're hearing. That's what you're going to hear coming out of your DAW. So when you add auxiliaries and everything else, you will hear the effect of the auxiliaries if you set it up that way. That's the only thing that I would say if you're going to work in your DAW and you're going to just use all the sounds and stay in your DAW, and you're just going to use plugins, just make sure you set up your mixer properly, and it will react like an actual real console. The only thing that's going to really separate a real console from the mixing console in your DAW is real mixing consoles actually have electronics that the signal's going across, that the electronics is affecting the signal to give it that sonic character. You might not, you will not really hear that distinctly in a DAW's mixer, because your computer, your PC or your Mac doesn't have output and input transformers and op amps and circuits like that. It doesn't have it. Some DAWs do a really good job of making you think it sounds like transformers or whatever, but for something to actually sound like it's going to come through a real transformer input and output, it really has to go through an actual real input and output transformer. This is the reason why I've seen a lot of people, even on this channel, have gotten consoles and so forth and more outboard gear. They just want that sonic character. So to wrap it up, this is the reason why, if this is done and you do it properly and you do this properly, this is the reason why you really don't need to have Pro Tools as an example. This can be done in pretty much any DAW. This can be done, if it's done right, you can do it any DAW. Luna, Reaper, Ableton Live, whatever the case, if it's done right. It's more about knowing how to get to use the tools to make good recordings and mixes than it is the tools themselves. And I'll end on this note. I'll end on this one last example. I can get a Nikon camera, I can get a Hasselblad, I can get a Leica, I can get a Canon. They're all going to take pictures, even though they're different. The makers of those cameras are different manufacturers, but they all are going to produce pictures. But I still need to know how to use the settings of the camera, the shutter speed, the ISO, the f-stop, and all these, the proper lenses, how to get the proper composition and the proper lighting and all that. I still got to know how to do all that, no matter what brand of camera I'm using. If I'm going to use a Nikon or a Canon, I still got to make sure I'm using the proper ISO, the proper white balance, and everything else to get a good looking picture. Because if I don't know how to do that, I'm never going to get a good picture. I don't care if it's Nikon or Canon or any camera manufacturer. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's a Neve console, an API, an SSL, an Allen Heath, Helios. If I don't know the functions of any of those consoles and when to engage a high pass filter, when not to, and how to use EQ and how to use compressors, I don't care what brand it is, it's not gonna come out right if I don't know what I'm doing. You have to know what you're doing and how gear works to make stuff sound right. It has nothing to do with the maker. And then once you know what you're doing, then the maker comes into play, whether it's a Neve or an API, and the character of a Neve preamp versus the character of an API, and you start to hear the sonic difference between a Neve and API and say, well, I like the way this Neve sounds on vocals or an instrument versus I'd rather use an API or whatever on the sonic character. But you got to know how to use the preamp to hear the characters of the preamp first. So that's going to wrap it up. And that's all I want to say. So like I said, Happy New Year's. And that's my goal for this year, is to complete my audio engineering series, get into some music production, some keyboard teaching classes. And I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing as far as this channel. And I always want to thank all the new subscribers and all the new people that that's pretty much joined the channel. So Happy New Year, and no matter what the outcome of, we don't know what the future brings, but let's just hope that it's always going to be for the best. Other than that, thanks for watching, and y'all have a great one.